All right, I'm Ian, and this is the Big Picture with Ian Nash. Again, we're back with Grant. Grant, what's up, man?
Hey, it's so great to be back.
We're
I'm
sure
looking
to,
forward to having a gas today.
yeah, man. So we're going a little more free form today. We'll just see where
Mhm.
it goes. I know you and I had talked about Revelation,
Yeah, the book of Revelation,
the book of
Apocalypse.
Revelation, and I mean the whole thing has a lot of really interesting chapters. I think today we're going to focus on the last two chapters, 21 and 22, because I think there's just a lot of interesting symbolism in there and just a lot of terms that other communities have kind of taken on. So I think there's a lot to kind of dig into there. So if it's cool with you, I'll just read a couple verses and then we can kind of chat about them.
Sure. Hey, listen. Before then, maybe give the viewers or listeners a little bit more in the sense of like maybe some of the stuff that I've either looked up or know about. And a lot of people claiming that what it is the last book of the Bible. And a lot of people claiming it was actually John the Apostle that was on the Isle of Patmos. But historically, more it seems like it might have been another John, and or some monk centuries later. So that's fascinating to me. And then just that it's at the end of the Bible as we know it, and
Okay.
something I teach my students when we go over discussing the Bible is that the reason it's at the end really is because it was such a weird book. I mean, it was they couldn't make up their minds. The council, like 300 years later, whether it should be in or not, it was controversial, and finally they put it in. And there are sects of Christianity that way back at the beginning that decided not to put it in.
Mm.
So it's just very interesting, and I know a lot of very um, literalist type people who approach the Bible always say, well, that book, it says, you shouldn't add or take away or this or that from this work. Hey, it's just talking about that particular gospel or book, not the whole Bible. It just happened to end up at the end of that thing.
Hmm.
But I find it, I mean, we can dive in. I find it, probably of the book of Revelation, that those last two chapters are the most hopeful. And like you said, a lot of people have picked up those last chapters and said, this is what they think they mean, or symbolically, they just have a lot of good things to say about the potential for the human race, I believe. Hey, I just want to throw this stuff in because, I got it here. I mean, I might as well, like, throw it
Yeah,
in there.
for sure. No, that's awesome. All right, so I'm reading King James, even though the version I grew up kind of reading and having read to me was the New King James, and I think that's what you said you
Mhm.
had in your hands.
Mhm.
But kind of in the vein of the Bible as God's poem, I find the
Yeah.
King James, both New King James and King James, to be very poetic. But this is just the
Oh,
King James version.
yeah.
But yeah, so I'm just starting from the beginning of chapter 21, and so it
Okay.
says. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Yeah. So just
Awesome
yeah,
stuff.
no, I love that. So yeah, man, I just got that fourth verse there. I mean, again, and so I like to think of this. So like when you think of the new church, you think of other religious communities, people
Yeah.
coming from different perspectives. It's like do we look at these things as things that really happened? At least different verses throughout the Bible where, okay, was this person, seeing into the spiritual world? Was this person seeing something that was physically happening? Um, and I like to entertain all different perspectives. And
Mhm.
I think of like, you know, kind of this kind of spiritual revival that a lot of people are going through right now in the world. It's like I like to believe that any of us would be capable of experiencing these things, right? Whether it's true or not.
Oh,
Like
mhm.
we I think a lot of us who grow up in the Christian tradition, we think of like, well, okay, angels used to appear to people, but they don't anymore. Or people used to talk with God or have these
Mhm.
experiences, but people can't anymore. And there
Mhm.
might and I'm sure you have some commentary on that as well. But yeah, man, just thinking about these verses, I mean, just like it is incredibly hopeful. Like I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men." Right? It's like it's not and I like to think of that as like when you think of like pantheism, right? That like everything is God. Like we are all God. The existence of the entire universe is like the vibration of God, right? So like the
Mhm.
tabernacle of God is within us, just like that idea that like God, God is a part of all of us, right? And that we're not necessarily subservient or we're not less than God. Like God might be different than us, but it is us, and I find that to be so, and God dwell with them they shall be his people and he will,
And he will be their God. Hmm.
yeah, and then,
So,
wiping away all the tears, right? No more death, neither sorrow nor crying, right? And and I guess I'll let you just comment on that, but I'm thinking too of just like this, this idea of a new heaven and a new earth, and this is a very new age concept in a lot of ways. Of like, eventually, at some point, the world will be vastly different than it is today, right?
mhm.
And for me individually, like I find it very, um, like I find it like a nice thing to think about or consider or believe in, of just like the suffering that human race is going through right now. Like eventually that will have to cease. Like I find it hard to believe that like just it's like a solid state continuum where the human race will be in this period of unhappiness and suffering that we've been in for what feels like a very long time, for that is always going to be the same till the end of our history. I really do, and I guess that's kind of where my new age beliefs do come in, is that I
Mhm.
really have to believe that things will be different at some point, right? That a new heaven and a new earth, whatever that actually means, like in very specific terms, I don't know, but just like I have to believe that there will come a time when things are vastly different, right? So that's why when I hear that verse about God wiping away all the tears and no more death and no more sorrow, I find that to be like a very, like you said, uplifting verse.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, when you get that verse, really, I think would speak to anyone and everyone. Just that sense. I mean, think about it, even in the sense of an individual who is sitting there, like going through tremendous sorrow or confusion, or and to hear that this can end, and that whoever their idea of God or their creator or the higher power of life and love and goodness or whatever will be one, or can be, one with them. Wow, it can't get any better than that. So I really like your universal look at this. I mean, it's not simply um, one religion's corner on this market that this is going to, and there are people that believe that, unfortunately. But there are paradisal end of the world scenarios in a lot, if you want to say, or apocalyptic scenarios in a lot of different religions. That, yeah, something goes on. Maybe some people see it as something very violent or a sad and hard time that ends up being something good. Um, and I think that that's true in life. I don't know if you probably agree with me. I mean, so often it's through those challenges or times and working through the trials and tribulations, as they say, that we do find, quote unquote, the new Jerusalem on the other side, or whatever, heaven as on earth. There's so much there. I just love it. I think that it's funny because people look at that whole book of Revelation in different categories about what it might be about. Like some people think that it was, and it was like something that John was saying that was going to happen during his time, that he was seeing something that was happening then. Others say, no, he was pointing to the Roman Empire, that was going to happen then. Others say, no, it's some future event coming even today. And then there are those who say, no, this is a spiritual, symbolic thing that has to do with humanity. I think that's where Swedenborg kind of comes in on it. But on the other hand, wouldn't you agree? They can all be true. They can all be true on different layers, and I think that's uh, that's what's so cool about it. And John may have thought it was about this, or this, and it may be about something completely different that he didn't even see at the time. But I don't know. I mean, everything you said just put it together so well. Oh, I guess the part about our I'd love to hear more about what you mean by this, but that we are God or on the level of God and this and that. I for me, what that means is like I do agree, like with say Lakota or like Great Spirit that exists in all, lives and moves in all things. That's
Yeah.
God, and that spirit or that energy, or that love energy, as we've talked about, is
Mhm.
in all things, and it is within us. So in that way, the tabernacle, right, of God is with man or humanity.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess I want to, would you agree with that? I mean, because I know that there are philosophies, and it's fun. You're entitled to believe whatever you want, but the idea that uh, does God in us, or are we God? I remember a good friend of mine, and Bill Brimfield, jazz musician in Chicago. In fact, it was the first person adult I ever baptized into the church. He said, I don't want to be God. Sort of like I want to taste sugar. I don't want to be sugar. And I thought that made a lot of sense. I don't know. What do you think about that idea, like
Yeah.
tabernacle
I
God?
think kind of in my exploration of that concept, I think I've listened to a lot of like Alan Watts, just very interesting kind of philosopher and stuff, and he was kind of one of the first people to bring Zen Buddhism to the West and
Hmm.
like kind of explain that kind of Zen is what he will describe as the religion of no religion. Like
Hmm.
Zen is, though his one of his famous quotes is, Zen is not thinking about God while you peel potatoes. Zen is to peel the potatoes, right? That all of our theorizing about the universe or God or anything is essentially moot, right? And we just need to live. And like the experience that we are having now, like whether you're riding a bike, driving a car, eating a sandwich, you are experiencing God. Like consciousness itself is God, right? And we are we're all different lenses, different apertures into the universe. We are essentially the universe experiencing itself, right? And in that sense, if you think of God as a politically kingly figure, that's not what we are. None of us are God as a king, but we are God in the sense that we have consciousness, right? And yeah, so that's kind of the way that I would phrase it. But I think that when like if you think about like in like 12 step communities and stuff
Yeah.
where it's like I know that I'm not God, or whatever the quote people say. I can't remember what it is right now, but all I know
There
is
is a God. There is a God, and it ain't me.
yeah, exactly, like there's a God, and I'm not it,
I'm
right?
not it.
So and I get that, and I think that makes sense in that regard of like a lot of people who do
That's
live.
ego.
Yeah,
That's saying your ego, right?
yeah, if you live your life in a way where you're destroying your life, other people's lives, and right, and you were serving your own desires, like without regard for other people's, wants and needs and everything. In that sense, that person needs to be told, I'm not God, right? Because they were living as if they were God in the kingly sense, God as the, emperor of the universe type
Mm.
thing. That person needs to be told that. But I think if you look at it as, and again, this is probably generational too, is where a lot of us kind of grew up with this sense of like not being good enough for God or good enough for
Mm.
the universe, or
Mhm.
like to have the sense of like, no, like the new universe needs you, right? The
Mm.
fact that like you are, yeah, it's like when you look into, like pantheism is not that we're all God and we can send thunderbolts and control stuff. It's more just that like um I'm trying to think of what the quote is. Like we are we didn't come into the world, we came out of the world, right? Like we were the universe, like we are, like if okay, so let's say the universe, like the Big Bang is how it started, right? So let's say the Big
Okay.
Bang, the physical universe was created in the Big Bang. We don't know how it happened or why or whatever, but let's say that was the beginning. That energy, those atoms, right, those molecules that happened in the Big Bang, we are a part of that because the atoms,
Yeah.
well,
Mhm.
right, we're a part of that, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's kind of that sense of like we're all continuous with the universe. Like we are all waves in the ocean, like not
Mhm.
or drops in the ocean, right? And we're not separate from it. So from that perspective, it's not that I am God and I therefore people should whatever people should listen to me or I'm the next reincarnation of Jesus and blah blah blah. Like no, it's like it's more in the sense of like being a part of the universe and also like the potential of achieving like that deep sense of connection with like the consciousness of the universe.
Mhm. Wow, that's a lot, and I'm familiar with a lot of that, and I was trying to put my head around it. But then again, isn't that part of it? Is hey, don't even try to put your head around it. That's the wrong
Yeah.
approach. Kind of.
Yes. Right.
It's interesting. In a completely. Oh, I never mind. It was just actually a story I told before about Tracker Jerry Finkelday. When I was trying to find God or whatever in nature or whatever, he said, "Get out of your head. It's not. It's not. You're not going to find it that way." I think this is what you're saying is some of the same thing. I do want to say I respect that there are many different ways to look at how to climb that mountain or how to come into that oneness of all things. And so I respect that. I may look at it a little differently, but I think in the long run it comes down to it's the same thing. For me, I guess the God being love or the creative force and all that is behind or initiated the Big Bang, and obviously in some way or another that creator is the Big Bang, and like you're saying, is everything that has come forth from it. I also think, and again, this is Swedenborg in the sense of that, God or this entity, love itself, needs something out or wants, desires, must have, by very nature of its definition, something outside of itself to love, to have that energy directed toward, and that we are created, or the number one reason is that we are those objects and receivers of that divine force that is all things. Okay, I'm looking, and that are part of it's interesting because the appearance is that we are separate, and that because of that we get to have on some level or another a choice, right? A choice to bring that in. It's interesting, a choice to realize that we're not separate, and that's what you're saying, right? But
Yeah.
but I think see, and so in a sense it's like we were created as something separate to have the freedom to become one with
Yeah.
that creative force. And so we're saying the same thing, or like in some ways, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think of just I really like what you said there about like if God is love, if the vibration of the universe and of all universes, if they exist, is love, is God, that love needs something to love, right? And therefore, that's why if the physical universe exists, God loves the planets, He loves the moons, He loves the stars, and then to have conscious beings for Him to love, and for those beings to have free will, right? The free will to
Yeah,
choose
it's
to
critical.
yeah to
Love and freedom have to go hand in hand. They
yeah,
absolutely
and you
in
think
all levels.
like and like an animals, right? A dog has free will to run or jump or bite somebody or not bite somebody, right? But the free will that human beings have, right,
Mhm.
is this critical part of consciousness, and I think that I think yeah, and I'm sure there are plenty of verses in the Bible that talk about this that just like you know that God loves us so much that He wants us to have free will, and yeah, we can choose to live our lives in really healthy and productive ways, and loving and caring ways, or really destructive ways,
Yeah.
and that
Hmm.
God loves all those people regardless, right?
Yeah.
And that they have that free will, and yeah, I think that's just, and again, I think that to the consciousness part of it, like that is you know, like the consciousness is this like kind of basic unit of existence for us, right? Because every moment that you are awake, right, you are operating in consciousness, right? You're constantly existing. So like for that to be kind of a part of being like being connected with God is that God gave us consciousness. God is consciousness. We are consciousness, and to that love to give us free will. I don't know. It's cool.
One of the things what you thank you, and you were just talking about is the idea, the free will, to obviously the idea is to accept that creative, loving force to flow through us and realize our oneness with that as well as each other, as we would agree with. Yeah, I think we would agree with that completely. It's interesting that we are talking about the idea that we also have to be free then to not accept that, to turn from that and take another way. And even in that, it's still that energy coming from God that we're shifting and twisting in a way that is not productive. But what I wanted to say was is so fascinating is I've done a lot of study of the near-death experience, and I actually teach about the afterlife. One of my courses at Bernathen College here, and we work a whole lot with the near-death experience before we get to what Swedenborg has to say. And one of the things that it's the joke: go to the light. The light or the being of light. That's God. That's the creative force. People who had been dead for quite a long time and then revived have often seen things, a lot more things than the typical near-death experience, where people may have an out-of-body experience, feel like seen friends and relatives, maybe seen a being of light, had a review of their life. Some people really go further down and see things that are, interestingly enough, some of them are very similar to the Book of Revelation. But what I wanted to say was, one thing that people have reported is they see these people or these beings or whatever that are turned away from the light and are moving away from the light, and they're confused and they're miserable. But it seems as if these people that see them recognize that it is a choice. That to me, I mean, if you wanted to put it in Christian terms, I mean, maybe that's what hell is, right? A hell is the absence of God, going the wrong way, free to do it. Nobody's happy about it. No one's putting us there except ourselves. And that's our choice. It was just interesting. I think that fits right in with religion, what people are experiencing, Book of
Yeah,
Revelation, everything.
yeah. I mean, I've explored, the concept of near death experiences,
Mhm.
a decent amount, and yeah, like Anita Morjani. I read her book. That was really interesting.
Mhm.
Dr. Evan Alexander. That's a really interesting one too.
Great book.
Yeah, that's a great book as well. Yeah, I mean, I think of it also like I think God appears to people in a way that they can stomach, right? I think if you were someone who was, grew up in a like very, very Christian background or whatever, like God's going to appear to you as Jesus because that's what's going to make the most sense to you. And I mean, just talking about Christ consciousness and that whole thing, I think is just very interesting concept as well. But yeah, like I really like talking about the choice part of it. Like I think in both of those, especially Anita Morjani's, but definitely just that idea of like they gave her the choice. Like, yeah, if you die, your husband, this was going to happen to him. This was going to happen to your kids, and because like in that in on the other side, right? And in at that vibration where the love is just so intense and she's just like you all the physical ailments and all the unhappiness and
Yeah.
stresses and that we all carry, it's just completely gone, right? And so she's just like essentially experiencing pure joy and she has no desire to come back to earth where we have to deal with these things that we have to deal with and just but yeah, she was given the choice. So that could be part of the free will of choosing good or choosing evil or whatever, but just that choice of like, yeah, you can stay here, but they need you back there. So go maybe head back to the world. And that, I guess, what I'm thinking is that kind of ties into the idea of a bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva is kind of like a Buddha who achieves nirvana, kind of just goes out of samsara and it reconnects with God, right? But a
Hmm.
bodhisattva is a being who achieves enlightenment, but then comes back to the world to then teach, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I guess I kind of see a parallel there of like, yeah, and then she did. She chose to come back, and help her family, and now she's this famous speaker and writer and all this stuff. And yeah, I love the near death experience story, and just how different they are, um, how much there is to learn from them, and just that, because I feel like so many people who choose to be atheist or agnostic or just are just don't want to engage with religion or spirituality at all. It just the idea that any person could be eternally damned or something or whatever, it's just so challenging. But then when you hear these stories of just like that, we are all so loved, and regardless of how you mess up or whatever you do, like God, the universe loves you so much, and just every little thing, every little crazy thing you thought, or whatever thing that you felt, or thing that something you're so ashamed of, like God loves you so much, like that we can't even conceptualize it in this physical universe, because we just like we say the word love, we talk about it, we theorize about it, but just like that maybe a lot of us like when you're a baby, you're inside your mother, or that that early connection and stuff, maybe that's a part of it. But then as we mature and grow, love becomes, you feel it sometimes, but love becomes very theoretical, and it becomes very verbal of like, oh, I love you, I love my brother, I love my cousin, I love
Right.
whoever, I love my parents. But it becomes a word versus like this really, really strong, overpowering, like joyous feeling that people have when they do go to the other side.
Yeah, well, that's what I think. I mean, I couldn't agree more. That's what I find too. I mean, you see it so much when you study this stuff or look into it. This Swedenborg, talked about that idea. He had the granddaddy of near-death experiences, like 35 years, claiming to be in the spiritual world. And I remember in theological school him talking about the love that exists in this other world in heaven, and God's love permeating as a what he called a sun, right? A spiritual sun, which I think was his scientific term as saying a being of light, which is what they call it today. Well, you hear that, oh yeah, love, love from God and all that, and yet when you hear what these people are experiencing, you realize, oh, love. I mean, they feel the warmth surrounding them, and it's alive and personal, and no judgment. I love that about the near death experience. There's so many different. Almost, I could almost say practically all religions, maybe not Buddhism, but have some kind. If there's an afterlife, there's some kind of judgment, and in the near death experience, there isn't. And So Swedenborg will also say, well, God doesn't judge us at all. We end up going or being who we choose to be. If we want to make our lives a hell, and that he would say that follows us into the other world, but
Mm-hmm.
we choose that hell. It's not, God doesn't throw us into hell. In fact, if we really got serious and used our heads a little bit, if God is love, God doesn't want to, can't, put us somewhere where we're tortured for eternity because we missed the cues or something. No, there's that pure love coming so strong at us. But God, God loves us so much, he allows us to mess up, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
so
absolutely.
it's pretty interesting.
I think, and yeah, like I think it made me think of like ancient Egyptian religion, and that's ancient Egypt is such an interesting topic, so much in there. But yeah, that idea, like, because there's not a judgment necessarily in the near death experience, but there is often a life review,
Oh
where
yeah, absolutely.
you essentially see your whole life as a movie, and a lot of times you experience it as the other person, right? So some really mean thing you said, or some way in which you harmed someone, you experience what they were going through and what they were feeling in that moment, and then so for your spiritual growth to be like, wow, I really harmed that person in that moment, and I feel that pain that person went through, right? And then I could go further on that. I would say, well, that we have those life reviews and we see the pain we cause people because theoretically, potentially we have further incarnations in the future where we can come back and do better next time, right?
Well,
Uh,
my study and
yeah,
experience in that, I mean, maybe this gets into again when we go back and forth with reincarnation or not or whatever. But may
yeah,
I oppose what you say this time
yeah,
in the
sure.
sense of that my vast study of the near death experience, it's rare for it to be about, oh, I did something wrong. In fact,
Mm,
most of the time it's extremely positive,
yeah,
even when you're going through it with, even when you're seeing those things you do wrong. It's still without you. I agree with you. You can go through and like, oh, that was wrong or whatever. But generally, if you're accompanied by either a guide or the being of light or whatever who's taking you through this or seeing
mhm,
it with you,
yeah,
it's always something you see it from a place of security, of love. It's usually the being is asking you basically, what have you done with your life? But
yeah. It's
it's more
not.
like coming back from
It,
summer camp. Hey, how was that for you?
yeah,
And the question is, have you learned to love and have you learned to grow wise? But it's
yeah,
always said with this amazing joy,
yeah,
as and so a little bit different. So I don't I agree with everything you're saying, except for I have not seen where it's this, oh, come to terms with what you've done. I've
yeah.
not seen.
I wouldn't. Yeah, again, I would not say it's a judgment, and I wouldn't say it's a necessarily coming to terms. It's just like you go through your life, right? And then you were 6 years old, and you said this really, really mean thing to another classmate. That being, whether it's Jesus or an angel or whatever, that's there with you for the life review. They're not condemning you in any way. They're just saying,
No, they don't. Right.
and you as a being, you experience it from that other person's perspective, and you feel what they felt, right? You feel, and that is what, like, a lot of the stories I've read, a lot of my delving into it is
Mhm.
not that that person or that entity is not judging you in that moment, just saying, hey, here's what that felt to that other person, like, and it's not a judgment. It's just that's what happened, right? And so yeah, I think and then the interesting thing about near death experiences is those people came back, right? It wouldn't be a near death
Yeah.
experience unless they came back,
Right.
right? So it's like it's a
There are lessons that
and
they
there
have learned. Yeah.
and yeah, and there are stories of people who they're like, yeah, it totally, like for Anita Morjani, like totally
Most
changed
people.
her life.
Most people.
Exactly. Just yeah, I mean there
I
was
all people.
yeah,
Right.
you
Yeah.
can't. That's the thing. It's like and I a lot of times, like, I'm very envious of people who have these types of experiences because, like, I feel like these, having that sense of like, okay, I know that other side exists, because
Mhm.
they've been there. Like, because have a lot of people like, oh well, like with Eben Alexander, he's like, I couldn't have imagined any of that stuff because I was brain dead. My brain was
Mhm. Right.
physically completely full of blood. My brain could not have function, during that period of time. So, you or people who just know everything that happened in the ER, everything that happened in the hospital room. It's just so interesting, So, um, yeah, I can't help but wish that, man, like I wish I could have something like
Well,
that. Yeah.
it's interesting you say that. I've thought about that so many times. I actually ask my students, is it fair that some
Yeah.
people have this and have this whole change of life? And
Right.
it's interesting because most of the time the students say, yes, it is fair. I mean, like, look, life is not, I mean, or no, life is not fair in general. Some people experience this, some people experience that. And I do understand that, but I keep coming back to, yeah, but these people, like, they come back changed, or at least, like you said, like, no fear of death. The other
Yeah.
thing, though, that is interesting, and I'm sure you're aware of it, all the studies that you've done, is that uh, a lot of people, though, when they do come back, go through a state of depression
Yeah.
because
Oh yeah.
they they miss it. I mean, if you're feeling completely and totally loved, which you just talked about, and also enlightened to understand. A lot of people, like, they understand all things. Swedenborg said, when I was in that light, I just felt like I could understand all things. And he says, quote unquote, sometimes I resented the fact that when I came back into the consciousness of this world, I couldn't grasp it anymore. And I've heard that so many times with the near death experience too, when they come back, like, oh, I understood all things. I felt complete love and acceptance and peace, and now I'm back here. Now they still feel like I should be here. I know that I have stuff to do, but wow, that was so. It's a balance, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. Like you go to the realm of just the vibration of complete love and just complete
Yeah.
acceptance. Like, I mean, it's a cool thing to think about. Just like I would imagine, just
There will be no death, no sorrow, no crying, for the
right,
former folks have passed away. Okay, I had to bring it back.
exactly, and maybe, to your point, maybe it's just the next place. Like the next place is the new heaven and the new earth, and just
Hmm.
that place where there is no sorrow and no crying and all that
Well,
stuff.
even if, and I certainly believe, and I think you do too, that it is an image of what can be here, but at the same time, that is heaven, right? I mean, that state is heaven, whether it's here or there. It's love in action, it's oneness, it's everything that we've been talking about. So I love that, all levels, it can be true.
Yeah, no, I really love it too.
Well,
Yeah,
that was really interesting. We, going to do the Book of Revelation. We ended up doing the near-death experience and all this esoteric stuff. That was really a lot of fun, actually. So
yeah.
we can hit this. I got the book here. I'm like, oh wow, okay, now what? But personally, I think we should quit right now while we're ahead and take this up
Oh, man,
again.
sure, man. Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, it really does. And like you said, yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like it would be cheating if we all had near death experiences, right? Like it would, and I'm sure these are things you've looked into or taught and studied, of just like
Yeah.
we wouldn't have free will. Like if every single one of us knew for sure that God existed, or knew that heaven existed, or knew whatever, it wouldn't be free will, right?
Exactly.
And so the fact that we do have it, and we do have the capacity to love, and love despite being harmed, right? We are here on this, plane of existence, and this planet, which is like can be incredibly challenging at times,
Oh
and
yeah.
and we choosing to love amidst suffering, right? Like that's the gift of God, right? That's a gift of free will from God. Is like, if you can learn how to love in the midst of all the suffering that we're exposed to and that we are sometimes victims of, that's true free will. That's the gift of
Yeah.
God.
And that's how it becomes our own. I mean, in other words, that's interesting because we're going to say that's how that love becomes our own, which another way of translating that would be, perhaps even in Buddhism, is that that's how we become one with that joy, with the joy and with the love, with life itself.
Nice. All right, cool, man. We'll quit while we're
Yeah,
ahead. So great job, man. I'll see you next time.
absolutely.
Yeah, sweet.